All right, well, it seems like we've talked about the Vancouver Canucks for the past month or maybe even 2 months. As they get set to host the Sabres, they are still the talk of the town. So we're going to break that down here on the latest on the fourth period. It's presented by CCM Hockey. I'm your host, Kate Pedersen, and with me is David Pagnotta. And Dave, the JT Miller trade, is it happening? Is it not? It sounded like it was inching close to the finish line with the New York Rangers. However, that has seemingly dissolved. There are rumors they're in talks with the Devils, also with the Hurricanes. What's the latest there? And do we think a trade is going to get to the finish line in the coming days?
Well, Kate, the Canucks are working at it. They've been working at it for a little while now. They want to get something done. They want this to be kind of put behind them. I think JT Miller would like some resolution here as well. And as these conversations continue, yes, the trade offer at the time over the weekend on Friday and Saturday broke down. Doesn't mean conversations with New York are finished. They're still going back and forth. They're still having those discussions. Depending who you talk to with New Jersey, Tom Fitzgerald, their GM, came out on Toronto radio last week and said he hasn't had talks with Patrick Allvin about JT Miller. Now, does that mean he's talking to Jim Rutherford? Does Allvin, is he talking to someone else? Are we talking semantics here? What I can tell you is as of this weekend, New Jersey is not one of the teams that has permission to talk to JT Miller's camp about facilitating a trade. There are other teams, I believe 3 or 4 teams, and I don't know if that includes the Rangers or not, or if that's in addition to, but let's say 3 to 4 teams right now that have permission to talk to Brian Bartlett and his camp, and his agency, excuse me, about JT Miller. Carolina has definitely been part of this mix. Dallas to a certain extent as well. Minnesota, Pittsburgh, even. Although I don't think there's really a match there between the Penguins and the Canucks and getting him home. But these are conversations that are going to continue. And like I said, Jim Rutherford, Patrick Allvin, they'd like to get something done sooner rather than later here because they feel it's time to just kind of clear this one and get the right pieces in place. But this isn't a full sell. This isn't future assets exclusively. They want an NHL caliber asset now as part of a package that may or may not include a first round pick, depending on the team.
And at this point, I'm hearing that they haven't gotten to a point where they're asking JT if he's waiving his no move clause. Is that sort of where you're at as well?
Yeah, and the fact that they've got teams talking to his camp kind of just eases that process as well. It's not like he's going to get sideswiped and be like, hey, all of a sudden, Carolina, would you go
Surprise.
here? Yeah, exactly. They're avoiding that. It's really going to come down to just the easy paperwork afterwards. We've got a trade in place. He's acknowledged his willingness to go to Team X, sign the paperwork. We'll submit the transaction to the registrar's office and be done with it. That just speeds things up a little bit.
All right. Well, we'll keep our eye on it, and hopefully, some action does actually happen here. Now, you wrote about it on Friday about Seth Jones and his potential availability out of Chicago. Originally, we're hearing they don't want to move him, but now we're hearing that Kyle Davidson is accepting calls and open to discussion. Now, Chicago also has a lot of other pieces to move, including Taylor Hall. So, what do you think their approach is heading into the deadline based on what you're hearing?
Yeah, and starting off with Taylor Hall and some other assets that they have. Patrick Maroon, also a pending UFA. Ryan Donato, also a pending UFA. Alec Martinez on the back end. His contract expires as well. These are pieces that a lot of contending teams have a lot of interest in, and these are guys that are likely to be moved ahead of the deadline. Now, in Hall's case, you're probably seeing Chicago retain about half of his $6 million cap hit to help get a trade across the finish line. They have 2 retention slots left, so they can eat money on Hall, and they still have the opportunity to eat on someone else. They ate on Jake McCabe's deal to Toronto a couple of years ago. That expires at the end of the season, so they'll gain a spot next year. But they're looking at different options. With Taylor Hall, like I said, they're going to retain on his deal. That's going to affect the price a little bit. But all of these players I mentioned, as I said earlier, they're on the radars for a lot of contenders. With respect to Seth Jones, there's a willingness from Chicago to retain on his deal as well. And he's got a $9.5 million cap hit. He's signed for quite some time. It's going to take a lot financially to push this one across. And I think this might be more likely to occur in the offseason if they do get a deal in place that they like. I think Seth Jones, from what I've been hearing as well, would be open to a move. He has a full no movement clause. but he isn't dying to get out of there either, just like Chicago isn't dying to get rid of him. So it's a trade that's going to have to make sense. But from uh, let's just call it what it is, he is available. But if the right deal falls into place for Chicago.
Okay, well, over in Seattle, 6 points out of a wild card spot in the West. It's not looking like they're going to be playing postseason hockey. They've got a couple prime targets that they could move, pending free agents Yanni Gourde and Brandon Tanev. But it's sounding like they're open to discussion about moving guys that do have some terms. So, what's our pulse check over in Seattle?
Yeah, Ron Francis is apparently open to a variety of different possibilities. Now, they are having some conversations to understand if there's an opportunity to sign Tanev and or Gord to extensions. But these are two guys that are highly coveted from a number of teams. Gord has a $5 million cap hit. Tanev has a $3.5 million cap hit. They bring different elements to kind of stabilize a mid-six to bottom six for a contending team. So they're going to generate a lot of interest. But they have other pieces too, with another year left on their contracts. Oliver Bjorkstrand, Jaden Schwartz, and Jamie Alexiak on the back end. Now, they all have no trade protection to a certain extent. One, I think Bjorkstrand has a 10-team list. Schwartz has a 16-team list, for example. But it sounds like Seattle, talking to other people around the league, they're at least open to having those discussions for guys that are not on an expiring deal right now. So that'll be an interesting way of kind of navigating the trade market for some contenders that wouldn't mind adding somebody now for a run, but also have them on the roster next season as well. So we'll keep tabs on that one. And I think, again, I mentioned Dallas earlier as a possibility with respect to at least poking on JT Miller. They've got money to spend, and they've got an ownership that's willing to spend it. So they're going to be players ahead of this deadline.
All right, one last thing. We love sounding the alarm bells, or maybe they're not alarm bells. You're going to weigh in on this. But Jets GM Kevin Shoveldayoff spoke during the intermission on Monday night, and he said, he hasn't started conversations with any of his players that are pending free agents. So, are Jets fans right to be concerned at this point?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Negotiations haven't begun yet for any of their pending free agents. Restricted, like Gabe Vilardi, or unrestricted, like Neil Pionk or Nikolai Ehlers. And I think that's because the mission at hand is go for a Stanley Cup. This is eye on the prize. We'll worry about the contract stuff later. They've had loose discussions. Like there's an understanding as to where kind of everybody sits. But I think the notion is let's focus on competing for a championship. We'll worry about that stuff after the fact. Now, there's been a lot of speculation. I reported about this in the summer that Nick Ehlers is likely going to explore free agency as a UFA this coming July. I don't believe that's changed, but at the same time, I don't think it's going to affect Winnipeg's ability to add to this roster and at the same time look to trade him. They're going to consider him, for now anyway, their own quote-unquote rental and go from there. But Winnipeg is focused on competing for a championship, not just to remain at the top of their division. They still have a lot of saltiness for what happened in the playoffs last year. They want to get rid of that. They want to go after a cup they're going to add to this team, and they'll worry about their guys after the fact.
Well, maybe 2025 is the year that the Stanley Cup comes home to Canada. We'll have to wait and see on that. We've got 2.5 weeks until a bit of a pause for the Four Nations face-off, and then just over 6 weeks till the trade deadline. So we'll continue to talk, and hopefully a lot of talk and a lot of action throughout the week as some of these trades seem to be coming to fruition. Dave, thanks so much for your time, and thanks to everyone for watching the latest here on the Fourth Period, presented by CCM Hockey.